Hello, everyone. I know yesterday was the Super Bowl. We couldn't be with you live, but in the state, we gonna be covering what we were supposed to cover yesterday, today, and we have, as you see, Olin with us. And what is the topic, Olin?
Do Muslims worship the God of Abraham? We hear this quite a bit, and we know that Muslims claim to be a religion that goes
Abrahamic,
all the way back to Abraham.
yeah, Abrahamic religion. They always
Yeah.
trying to claim that. Um, Now you will be presenting this from the Bible and the Quran.
That's right, and we're also going to look at this, an interesting piece of archaeological evidence that really supports the Bible and doesn't support the Quran.
Awesome. I know maybe many of you are at work right now, but feel free to put your questions later on in the chat, and maybe next Sunday we can go through some of these questions. Olin, it's all yours, brother,
Thank
and
you.
I will go ahead and put the PowerPoint for you.
Sounds good. Thank you, George. All right. If you search for Abraham on the internet, you will, as you heard, likely come across numerous references to this idea of three Abrahamic religions. And that is, of course, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Muslims claim that they are connected to Abraham just as Christianity and Judaism is. This has become quite popular. This phrase, Abrahamic religion, has become quite popular since September of 2001. And really, what's concerning is just the sheer number of people who believe this kind of thing simply because they heard it from someone else, they heard it from their friends and their family, or they read an article online. They assume that what they heard or read is true. And of course, it's a very well established fact that Judaism and Christianity have connections to Abraham, but I hope to demonstrate that that's not the case with Islam. Our Muslim friends would object, but the burden of proof is on them, as always. The Bible is historically superior to the Quran, and the old always tests the new. Moreover, if we look at the evidence, there's little, if any, evidence to indicate that Islam is connected to this biblical character in any kind of way. The name Abraham resonates with us, and we know who he is because the Bible tells us who he is. This is something that goes all the way back to the Bible. And this term Abraham only has meaning because of the Bible, not because of the Quran. But again, we're going to look at some archaeological and really some extra biblical or documentary evidence to support the Christian scriptures as well. So just to give you an overview of the material that I will be presenting today, we're going to look first of all at the Abrahamic Fallacy. Secondly, we'll take a look at the theology of Abraham in the Bible, and then the theology of Abraham in the Quran a little bit, and then we'll transition and take a look at this archaeological and historical evidence that supports Christianity. And so we begin with the Abrahamic fallacy. Our beliefs should rest on what's true, what corresponds with reality, again, whether it be physical or spiritual reality. And although history is not like math, we can't know it with absolute certainty. We can and should look at the evidence. We do have historical evidence. We do have enough evidence to reach a reasonable conclusion that Islam is false and Christianity is true, that Islam really has no connections whatsoever to Abraham, but Christianity and Judaism does. Second Thessalonians 2:10 speaks of the end times deception, saying that those who perish do so because they did not receive the love of the truth so as to be saved. And anybody that's tried to have this type of discussion or tried to present the gospel to Muslims know how difficult it is to just get our Muslim friends to think about what's true. Jesus, he warned us about deception in Matthew 24. This is for us as well. Many professing Christians today often speak of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as the three Abrahamic faiths. But I start out with the Abrahamic fallacies because to speak of the three Abrahamic faiths is to commit a logical fallacy. Anyone who refers to these three religions as connected to Abraham, connected to this biblical patriarch, as if he is some kind of figure of unity, commits this fallacy, because in reality, Abraham, or Ibrahim, as he is called in the Quran, is an intensely divisive figure among Jews and Christians and Muslims. As usual, the Quran and other Islamic sources are a problem for our Muslim friends. If you want to expose Islam, simply listen to what's being said and then quote the appropriate Islamic sources. In Surah 369, we have actually 369 through 78. The Quran warns Muslims about being led astray by the people of the book, otherwise known as the Jews and the Christians. Yet, it also declares that those who follow Muhammad are nearest to Abraham and therefore his spiritual inheritors, not the Jews and the Christians. Surah 7, 157. Muhammad and the Quran claim that they supersede the Torah and the gospel. So when Muhammad speaks of the religion of Abraham, again, this is a phrase that's found throughout the Quran. When you see this phrase, the religion of Abraham, you may be tempted to think that this is a point of unity. This is an area that Jews, Christians, and Muslims can all agree on, but that's not the case. When Muhammad uses this phrase, he's speaking of Islam. So it's a fallacy to use this phrase, the three Abrahamic faiths. If we transition now to the Abraham of the Bible and the Ibrahim of the Quran, I'm having a difficult time seeing this. Bear with me just a moment. All right, the Abraham of the Bible and the Ibrahim of the Quran are not the same. If we look at the Bible, you should notice right away several things that are incompatible with Islam. Genesis 12, 7, and of course 18:1. They're just absolutely fascinating passages from the Old Testament. And here we're told that the Lord appeared to Abram by the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. Now, whenever you see the word Lord in all caps like this, it's a reference to Yahweh. It's the what's called the Tetragrammaton, the personal name of God. So the Bible tells us that Yahweh appeared to Abraham, and he appeared in such a way that he could be seen and he could be heard. This is what is known as a theophany, where God manifests himself in human form. And here the Bible describes three men who appeared to Abraham. Some people try to say that this is a Trinity. Don't believe that. That's not the case. These three men, one is Yahweh, as I've already said, the Lord appeared to Abram, but the other two are simply angels, and we know this from Genesis 19:1. So don't make that mistake. Also, don't make the mistake of thinking that the physical form or appearance of Yahweh here in a material body is a part of the divine nature of God. John 1:18 says that no one has ever seen God because he's a timeless, spaceless, immaterial spirit. But it is the Son who took on human flesh and dwelt among us who reveals or explains the Father. This Greek word found in John is exegemi, from which we get our word exegetical or exegesis. To exegete the scriptures is to explain them in a way that is accurate. I would also add that these theophanies, I think they, in some sense, prepare us for the coming of Jesus and the gospel messages. This is not, this idea of God entering into his creation is not something exclusive to the New Testament. We see it happening right here in the Old Testament as well. I've explained this before, but there is a difference between a theophany. He's, in the Old Testament, God is manifesting himself in human form, but he's not actually a human being. Later on in the New Testament, he does enter into his creation as the Son enters into his creation as the God man. He is both God and both man. So there is a difference there. But here we see that Yahweh appeared to Abraham in human form. In the New Testament, the Son who existed in the form of God, from Philippians 2, actually takes on the form of a bondservant, being made in the likeness of men, and dies a substitutionary death on the cross. So there is a difference. But I think these theophanies prepare us for what we're going to read about in the New Testament, the incarnation and the Son of God taking on human flesh. So this is a great way to show our Muslim friends that the deity of Christ, or the fact that God enters into his creation, is not a later addition. It's not something that's borrowed from the pagans. You can find indications of this in the Old Testament as well. Neither the Trinity nor the deity of Christ are later additions, as I've said. The God who appeared to Abraham is the same one who is revealed to us in Jesus Christ. Notice the divine characteristics of this man who is speaking to Abraham. Notice the divine characteristics of Yahweh here, who appeared to Abraham. He's all-knowing. He's all-powerful. He says, surely I will return to you this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son despite her old age. Sarah thinks this is funny, and Yahweh says, is anything too difficult for the Lord? Again, think about this. This is the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, manifesting himself in human form and speaking to Abraham. He's carrying on a conversation with him in a very natural way. And if we return to John 8:56, Jesus tells the Jews, your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad. In verse 57, the Jews say to him, you are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? So they believe that Jesus was saying that he had seen Abraham, and perhaps this is the place where he saw Abraham, at the oak trees in Mamre. Muslims who want to object to these, or, they want to disagree, they have to prove that the text has in some way been corrupted, even though the Quran affirms the Torah and the gospel in several ways. So just by way of review, we see that the God of the Bible enters his creation as a man in Genesis 18:1. He speaks with Abraham in Genesis 18:13. He's all-knowing, 13:10, all-powerful in 13:14, all the while manifesting himself as a human being to Abraham. This theology is radically different from Islamic theology. If we look at Surah 367, here it says that Abraham was not a Jew nor a Christian, but he was true in faith and bowed his will to God's, which is Islam. Yusuf Ali insertion here. And he joined not God's with God. And, we might respond by saying, of course, Abraham comes before his grandson, Judah, from which we get the term Jew. But this fact doesn't really tell us anything about the God of Judaism or Christianity. Moreover, neither of these religions joined gods with God. They are strictly monotheistic. They simply have a different concept of God. Also, Muslims generally going the wrong way there. Let's go back. Muslims generally reject the idea of Allah manifesting himself as a created being. The Quran, over and over again refers to him as the Most High. We see this in Surah 87:1. 6:18 tells us that he reigns supreme over his creation. Surah 16:50, they fear their Lord above them. Again, over and over again, the reader is told that Allah is exalted. He's very transcendent, above what they associate with him, above coming to earth. And Muslims just totally reject this idea that Allah could take on human flesh and come to earth. But this is exactly what we find here in the Bible and indications of it in the Old Testament. If we turn our attention to the historical evidence, we find around AD 130 that Justin Martyr argues that Jesus is the Messiah from the Old Testament. And one evidence that he presents involves Abraham at Mamre from Genesis 18:1. And this is a quote from him here. He writes, Moses, then, that blessed and faithful servant of God, tells us that he who appeared to Abraham under the oak trees of Mamre was God, sent with 2 accompanying angels. That's a pretty huge piece of documentary evidence that dates to AD 130. Very, very, very helpful, I think, in our discussions with Muslims. We find another document or another extra biblical writer, Eusebius. He also writes about Abraham and Mamre around 318 AD. And he says, he, that is Jesus, is no angel, but one greater than an angel, the God and Lord who was seen beside the before mentioned oak with the 2 angels in human form. This would be our Lord and Savior, putting on human form and shape and revealed to the godly ancestor Abraham who he was. Again, huge piece of evidence that predates Islam, long before Muhammad, long before Islam. These men argued for the historical reliability of the Old Testament by pointing to this event at Mamre that we just read, that we just looked at from the very first book of the Bible, Genesis 18. And when I first heard about what I'm about to tell you now, I was so excited. This is some of the best archaeological evidence for the Old Testament that I've seen ever, I think. Modern day archaeologists have excavated this site near Hebron. And when they arrived, it was just a mound of dirt. And they began to dig and discovered that there were several different layers, and you can see them in this picture here. So, in other words, they were able to go back in time, and they're able to date these different layers by looking at the pieces of pottery that were found on the site. And they concluded that the oldest and the deepest layer they found, where they discovered pottery, was dated to the Bronze Age, around 2000 BC, to the time of Abraham. And Genesis 13:18 is, as far as I know, the oldest text that we have mentioning this this site or this place at Mamre, and it tells us that Abraham went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he pitched his tents. Then he built an altar to the Lord, to Yahweh. And notice that the text says at Hebron and not in Hebron. This makes sense. Abraham, being a rich man with lots of livestock, would have had to have found a place outside of the city walls. We also know that there was a natural spring here as well to provide water for his livestock. And for some time, the archaeologists were perplexed by as they dug down, they eventually reached this bedrock, and they were perplexed by these large holes that they found in the bedrock. But later they determined that these were the places where the great trees, the great oak trees of Mamre, once stood, that are mentioned here in the Bible, with a constant water supply from the stream, the spring. It would have been possible for these trees to become huge, as they are described in Scripture. This was, again, something that archaeologists know in various ways happened during this time. So, what an amazing archaeological find! And we might rightly ask, why was this place honored and protected throughout the ages? We can go from all the way back to 2000 BC, to the time where Islam came, and we can see the different layers and what they represent, what they tell us. So why was this place so important throughout time? I don't think the Quran answers this question. I know it doesn't. But we can look to Genesis 13:18. Just one simple verse. I mean, there's more in the Old Testament. Genesis 12, Genesis 13, and some other passages that speak to this event. But all we have to do really is look at this one single verse from the Bible to make sense of the archaeology. And this one verse stands in support of the Christian scriptures. So what a joy it is to know that the historical evidence for the Bible, the archaeological evidence, overwhelmingly supports the Bible. This is just one site. It's been said that there has never been anything dug up from the earth that discredited the Bible. On a more humorous note, I think it's Frank Turek that says, every time a shovel goes into the ground in Israel, a liberal gets saved. I wish that were the case with our Muslim friends. Our religion, our book is true. We don't have blind faith. We don't have to embrace a contradictory and plagiarized book like the Quran. The God who appeared to Abraham is the same one who took on human flesh and dwelt among us. He, again, took on the form of a bondservant, being made in the likeness of man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. We can have confidence that the God of Abraham revealed himself in the person and work of Jesus Christ. Yahweh, Yeshua, his very name means Yahweh saves. That's our God. That's the God that we know. That's the God that we have a personal relationship with. That's the God that speaks to us louder than any audible voice we've ever heard from the Bible. What a joy. What a joy it is to know that our God has revealed himself to us in such a way that we know historically that our faith is true. We know that Christianity is true. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope that you can use some of this in your conversations with your Muslim friends. There's a lot of this material came from a book called Where God Came Down. I would highly recommend it. I will try to put a link to it in the description box, and just absolutely filled with rich material that will probably do a much better job than what I've done here today in showing you the evidence for the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.